I never thought that living with my own son would end up being a countdown to exile and betrayal. When Marcus screamed, "Get out of my house or I'll send you to a nursing home," I didn't flinch. I zipped my suitcase slow, teeth of the metal track grinding loud against the tension. He stood by the fireplace, red creeping up his neck, pacing like he had somewhere righteous to be. I folded my scarf, packed the charger, snapped my checkbook shut. I didn't ask for an explanation, and I sure didn't cry. A black limousine pulled up 1 hour later, right on time. Marcus watched from the foyer with his arms crossed, but that flush was gone from his face. He looked pale now. The same boy who used to hide behind my skirts when strangers talked too loud, standing here at 60 like he was evicting a tenant. I opened the door myself, walked out without a word, didn't look back. Mr. Eric Dalton stepped out of the car and opened the door for me. Navy three-piece, sunglasses tucked in his collar. "Afternoon, Mrs. Gaines," he said, holding a thick folder marked Fidelity Private. We hadn't seen each other in over a year, not since Charles passed. But when I called him that morning from the pantry with the door closed, he'd cleared his calendar by 2 p.m. I slid into the back seat beside him, my suitcase already in the trunk. "Transfer ready?" I asked. He nodded. "We can finalize today. All 3 accounts, plus the trust reset." His tone was clean, no pity, just business, which I appreciated. Marcus stood on the porch now, staring. I could see his throat move like he wanted to call something out, but nothing came. I didn't wave. I let the car pull off. Let the gate close behind me for the last time, without a key in my pocket. Let him watch me disappear into leather seats and tinted glass, while the papers that made him feel so powerful were about to vanish in real time. By the time we reached the corner of West Paces and Peachtree, Mr. Dalton handed me a signed asset transfer receipt. I looked at the numbers, then folded it neatly and slid it into my purse. 3 weeks earlier, on October 3rd, I had just come in from the patio when I heard Marcus's voice echoing from the kitchen. Speakerphone, careless, entitled. "If she signs over the condo," he said, "we could finally renovate the guest house into our poolside suite." Simone laughed lightly on the other end. "Then we can move the sauna downstairs. Get rid of that tacky linoleum. It's like living in a church basement." I stood behind the half-open door, my palms slick on the grocery bag handles. Not a whisper of shame in either voice. He was at the island, chopping celery, like he hadn't just gutted me mid-sentence. I didn't move. I waited to be sure. And then he added, "She's getting softer. If I say it's for tax purposes, she'll probably do it." The bag slipped slightly in my hand, and the can of crushed tomatoes clanked against the floor. Not loud, but enough. Marcus turned toward the doorway. I stepped in like I'd just arrived. "Didn't hear you come back," he said, wiping his hands, eyes darting from the phone to my face. "I was outside checking the rosemary." "Dried out again," I said. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. He pressed the screen fast. Simone's voice vanished. "Just talking to the contractor," he said. "For the guest house." I walked past him, set the groceries down, and put the can back into the bag like that was all that mattered. He didn't try to explain further, just kept chopping, slower now, quieter. I went upstairs and opened my desk drawer, pulled out the manila envelope labeled Title and Deed, Peachtree Condo. Still in my name only. Not co-owned, not shared. Charles and I had bought it in '96 as a backup property. I moved into it after his funeral, and Marcus had offered me the guest room in Buckhead for comfort. I had believed him. Downstairs the blender came on, ice and fruit churning into noise. I stared at the title papers, ran my finger across the embossed county seal. Then I picked up a pen and circled the signature line. I didn't sign anything. Not then. But I did text Miss Charisse Holloway. Me, available for a state consult this month? Her reply came 4 minutes later. "Charisse, of course. I'll fit you in." By August, the shift was no longer subtle. It was systematic. Simone had started forgetting to include me in the Sunday dinners, even though I lived in the same house. I'd walk down the stairs to the smell of roast and cornbread, only to find 4 plates set. None for me. "Oh, I thought you were resting," she'd say, smiling like it was kindness. One Sunday I found out they'd had Simone's parents over. "Just last minute," Marcus claimed, waving it off with a shrug. Then the garage code stopped working. I stood outside with 2 bags of groceries in the August heat, punching in the digits. Our old alarm pin, the one we used since I moved in. Nothing. Not even a denial beep. Just silence. When Marcus got home 2 hours later, he acted surprised. "Oh yeah, I had to change it. Simone's mom forgot it, and I didn't want strangers knowing our entry code. Never mind that I had lived there longer than her mother had even known our address. Still, I let it go. I told myself I didn't need to be at every dinner table, that maybe they just needed space as a couple. But the truth was already creeping in like mildew behind the walls. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon. I went to check the safe upstairs, the one built into the back of Marcus's office closet. We'd stored the important things there after Charles passed. Insurance papers, birth certificates, the original deed, and Charles's Rolex. It wasn't just a watch. It was the one he wore to our anniversary dinners, the one he left in my hand before his last surgery. I hadn't worn it since, but I opened the safe sometimes just to see it, to remember. This time, it was gone. I checked the shelf twice, reached behind the files, pulled everything out and laid it across the carpet. Documents, a velvet pouch, even the fireproof envelope with our marriage license. No Rolex. I called Marcus upstairs. He came, half annoyed, said maybe I had moved it and forgotten. Simone poked her head in too. Casually holding a mug like this was just a mild inconvenience. "Maybe you misplaced it when we reorganized," she said. "We never reorganized." I didn't argue. I closed the safe, resealed the envelope, and that night, I emailed Miss Holloway again and asked for a copy of our original trust. By mid-October, the hints stopped pretending to be anything else. I walked into the kitchen one morning and found a glossy trifold brochure on the counter beside the coffee maker. Graceful Meadows Senior Living, Independent, Assisted, and Memory Care Suites. There was a pale, smiling woman on the front holding a basket of oranges. The kind of image meant to feel safe, clean, painless, a quiet shove out of the way. I turned it over. The address was in Smyrna, far enough to keep me out of sight, close enough for Marcus to manage the paperwork. I left the brochure exactly where I found it. When Simone came in humming, wearing her workout tights and clutching a green smoothie, she glanced at it once, then back at me. "I heard Graceful Meadows just added a new wellness wing," she said. "Apparently it's great for people who want community without the maintenance stress." No eye contact, just the edge of a grin and a quick sip through her metal straw. That evening, Marcus brought it up directly. We were in the family room. He muted the television like this was an intervention. "Mom," he said, shifting forward on the leather ottoman, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time you consider downsizing. For your peace of mind. The condo, the responsibilities. You deserve a lighter load." I asked, "Lighter for who?" He exhaled sharply through his nose, rubbed the bridge of his nose like I was being difficult. "We're just trying to help you plan ahead. You're still sharp, but it's better to get things in place now while you're in control." Control. That was the word he didn't even realize he'd fumbled. I nodded like I was listening. Inside, I was tracing the pattern. The missing invitations, the locked garage, the vanishing watch. Now this, it wasn't just neglect. It was a campaign. I was the obstacle to their upgrade. The next morning, I removed the condo title from my desk drawer and placed it into a new envelope. Labeled it, "Do not transfer, legal hold pending." Then I called Cherise Holloway's office and requested a formal deed review and affidavit of ownership update. Her assistant booked me for October 19th at 10 a.m. Midtown office. Legal file prepped in advance. On October 19th at 10 a.m., I sat across from Ms. Cherise Holloway in her Midtown office while she read the original trust documents line by line, pen tapping softly against her legal pad. Her office hadn't changed since the last time I'd been there. Quiet, firm, sun muted behind smoked glass. Cherise didn't waste time with niceties. She asked for the full packet: deed, trust, power of attorney, and health directive. I handed them over one by one from a brown accordion folder I hadn't opened in years. The same one Charles and I built together in 2012, after his first heart scare. She reviewed everything without flinching. No small talk. Just page-turning and precise questions. Any updates to beneficiaries since your husband's passing? I shook my head. Any secondary trustees granted financial access? I told her about Marcus. Informal, I said. He helped me manage the bills after Charles died, but I never filed a formal designation. She made a mark in the margin. Good. Because nothing here gives him that authority. Her voice was crisp, with the kind of quiet force I'd forgotten women could have in rooms like this. She flipped to the trust's final page and leaned back. And here's something you might have forgotten. She pointed to the clause under Section 12, Contingent Beneficiaries and Living Will Provisions. My eyes followed the lines she traced. It was all still there, exactly as we'd written it. In the event of my incapacitation or death, primary, medical, and financial decisions would pass to my appointed advocate, Jasmine L. Gaines, my granddaughter. Not Marcus, not Simone. Jasmine, who was 24 now and finishing law school in North Carolina. At the time, it had felt symbolic. Now, it was a safeguard I hadn't even realized would matter this much. Charisse sat forward. This language still holds, unless you filed something contradictory. Have you signed anything else since 2016? No, I said. Nothing. She nodded once, tight. Then your assets, property, and medical authority are fully intact. I recommend we log this updated review with a time-stamped affidavit and keep a second sealed copy off-site. I'll draft it today. Before I left, she handed me a receipt for the service and a stamped cover sheet. Verified ownership and living will status, Gaines Estate. She didn't say, be careful. She knew I already was. That evening, after dinner, I sat at the small desk in the guest room, what they called my space, sorting through the documents Charisse had flagged earlier. The new affidavit was clipped neatly to the front of the trust folder. Everything had gone exactly as it should have. Still, something felt unsettled in my chest, like a muscle pulling tight without cause. I checked my phone out of habit. That's when I saw the email, Bank of America alert, wire transfer declined. I tapped it open. Time-stamped 6:17 p.m., just 2 hours after I left Charisse's office. A wire transfer attempt of $17,500 was declined due to insufficient verification. Please log into your account to review. At first, I assumed it was phishing. Then I looked closer at the account ending 6,743. The old joint checking account Charles and I had opened for property expenses. I hadn't touched it since 2019. Marcus, however, still had access. I'd let it be, thinking it was harmless. Just a shared backup we'd both forgotten to close. I logged in immediately. My heart didn't pound, but my breath slowed. Focus narrowed. The account had barely $900 in it. No recent deposits. But under pending transactions, there it was. A declined outbound wire for $17,500, flagged as external services vendor payment. No vendor listed. No note. The request had originated online. I clicked into the details. The request came from a device listed as iOS Atlanta, Georgia, with an IP address I didn't recognize, but the browser was Safari. My phone was Samsung. I reached for my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and started writing. 10/19, 6:17 p.m., minus $17,500 wire attempt. ACCT number 6,743. Marcus authorized since 2018 declined. Below it, I added, call bank fraud department in the morning. I logged out, cleared the cache, and forwarded the alert to myself with the subject, evidence, Marcus activity. Then I copied the email into a folder I'd started building that week, named simply, protection. The next morning, I would call the fraud department and initiate a case file. But that night, I sat at the desk, clicked my lamp off, and let the room go still while my fingers rested on the keyboard. Steady, deliberate, awake. At 8:02 the next morning, I called Bank of America's fraud department and gave them everything. the transfer amount, the timestamp, the device mismatch, the history of the account. The woman on the line, Denise, didn't ask unnecessary questions. She listened, typed, and placed me on hold twice while she cross-checked access logs. When she came back, her tone had changed. The transfer attempt originated from a device registered under Marcus Gaines, she said. We show a matching login on October 1st, as well as several throughout the past 6 months. She paused. Would you like to initiate a fraud claim and lock the account? Yes, I said, and then again with more force. Immediately. She generated the report while I stayed on the line, reading each step aloud so there'd be a record. Case ID hash B78F-ZY94. Review period 180 days. I requested a hard copy summary and a device access history to be mailed to my condo's address, not Marcus's house. Denise confirmed the change. I also revoked all third-party user privileges. And when she asked if I wanted to keep Marcus on the account with view-only status, I told her no full removal. It was the first time I'd said that out loud. After the call, I printed 6 months of statements and began combing through each transaction. Most were routine, the same small balance hovering month to month. But in August, a $240 ATM withdrawal appeared, location, Buckhead. I was out of town that weekend, visiting Jasmine in Durham. In September, a failed debit card authorization from a luxury furniture store I'd never stepped foot in. Then October 1st, a login from an IP address tied to Marcus's home network. The pieces weren't just scattered now, they were aligning. He'd been testing the boundaries. Not a single theft, but a series of probes, waiting for me not to notice. I wasn't supposed to be reading these statements. I wasn't supposed to know the account still functioned. I exported the logs into a spreadsheet, flagged every irregularity, and saved a digital copy onto a flash drive I wore on a lanyard under my robe. I wasn't just gathering information. I was building a perimeter. By noon, the account was locked, a fraud case was active, and Marcus had no idea he'd been exposed. The next morning, I asked Marcus to sit with me in the breakfast nook. No dramatics. Just a quiet cup of coffee poured in silence. The morning light cutting through the blinds like bars. He showed up still in gym clothes, stretching his calf like this was any other Tuesday. I slid my laptop in front of me and clicked open the PDF of the flagged wire attempt, angling the screen slightly toward him. He laughed. Not even subtle, one of those dry, awkward laughs that come too fast and too loud. "Mom," he said, leaning back in the chair like I'd just accused him of stealing change from my purse. "You must have clicked something by accident. That account's been sitting there unused for years." I didn't answer. I let the spreadsheet speak. I pulled up the access log next. Date, time, device name, IP address, all tied to his home network. The furniture store transaction. The cash withdrawal in August while I was out of state. His smile didn't disappear immediately, but it changed shape, tightened, corners twitching. "I mean, maybe I logged in just to check on things," he said, suddenly interested in his mug. "I didn't think you were even using it. I was trying to help manage it, like I've always done. We've never had secrets about money." I let that statement hang in the air a beat too long. He had always assumed I didn't look, that my trust was permanent, blind, that once he'd been allowed to help, he was entitled to control. But his mistake wasn't accessing the account. It was forgetting who had built the money in it in the first place. "You didn't think I'd check," I said. "You assumed I was still grieving too much to pay attention." "I didn't steal anything, Mom." "You tried to," I said, "and you failed. That part matters more." He stood up too quickly. "I was just smoothing things out." "You don't have to take this so seriously." I tilted the screen closed. "It's already serious. The bank thinks so too. There's a case file now." He stared for a moment, searching for the old dynamic. But I didn't move. And when he left the room, the silence that followed was different. Not tense. Not even angry. Just final. After Marcus left the kitchen that morning, I went straight to my room and opened the envelope where I'd started keeping printouts. Every document had its place now. Statements, screenshots, timestamps. But I needed to move beyond digital trails. I needed evidence that tied their fingers to something physical. That's when I remembered the Venmo notifications from weeks back. Transactions I'd glanced at, confused at the time, but now impossible to ignore. I logged into the account that Marcus had once set up for me, just in case we ever needed to send family money. I barely used it, but the account was still active. The history showed 2 recent transfers, one for $3,700 on September 6th, the second for $2,500 on the 20th. Both marked reimbursement. Neither had been sent by me. I opened the transfer details. Sender, the joint checking account. Recipient, at Simon & Gaines. The notes were vague. Thanks, babe, on one, and for the setup on the other. I clicked download and saved the receipts. Then I called Sharice's office and asked her paralegal if those transfers, if unauthorized, could be added to the fraud file. Absolutely, she said. Keep a paper trail. We'll include them in the financial misconduct review. Later that afternoon, I remembered the missing Rolex. It had been nearly a month since I last searched for it, and they'd both acted so casual that day I almost believed maybe I had misplaced it. But I hadn't. I never moved it. Charles's watch stayed in its blue velvet box at the back of the safe, until it didn't. That detail was settled in my mind like concrete. I opened Simone's public Pinterest page, curious to see if her fantasy renovations were still posted. Scrolling past her mood boards, modern farmhouse guest suite, dream pool cabana, I landed on something better. A pinned post from Jeffries of Atlanta. High-end consignment. I clicked through to the site, searched by keyword, and froze. There it was. Rolex Oyster Perpetual Date Just. Men's. Gold bezel. Serial number 5, C911X. Still engraved. The listing had been appraised and verified. And the seller name, S. Gaines. I printed the page, wrote the serial number in the margin, and slid the paper into the evidence folder. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was proof. Sharice called me on the morning of October 24th, her voice unusually tight. I need you to come in today, she said. Something's come across my desk that requires an in-person review. I was in her office by noon. She didn't offer coffee or small talk this time, just slid a stapled set of papers across the desk with one manicured finger pressed on the top line. Durable power of attorney, effective immediately, filed under my name, submitted electronically to the Fulton County Clerk's office, dated September 15th, signature, mine, or rather, a version of mine. I stared at it, blinking once, then leaning forward. Sharice tapped the second page. This signature was lifted directly from a 2010 tax return you filed jointly with your husband. Same slant, same angle, same ink dropout on the L. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. My stomach had already twisted the moment I saw the date. I had not signed anything in September, and I certainly hadn't authorized anyone to take control of my medical, legal, or financial affairs. Sharice continued, flipping to the third page. The filer was someone named Keisha Layton. Ring a bell? I shook my head. She listed herself as your designated legal assistant and submitted through the e-notary system using credentials from a firm that doesn't exist anymore. But I dug a little further. She opened a folder on her laptop and turned the screen toward me. On it, a photo pulled from a public wedding album. Simone's cousin Keisha, standing next to Simone and Marcus last Christmas, in the matching green satin bridesmaid dress. I remembered her vaguely, loud voice, acrylic nails, always in the corner scrolling her phone. She used expired notary credentials, Sharice said, filed with false affiliation, impersonated your consent, and triggered an automatic indexing into the clerk's office. I felt my teeth pressed together as I sat back, watching the heap of documents grow into a strategy. They hadn't just been waiting for me to slip. They were trying to build a world where I no longer owned anything, where, on paper, I didn't even have the right to say no. I've already filed a motion to flag this POA as fraudulent, Sharice said. You'll receive a rejection letter from the clerk's office by mail. I'll keep the original here for chain of custody. My hands didn't tremble. I just placed the forged papers back in the folder, zipped it shut, and added one more tab. Attempted identity theft, Keisha Layton. The same afternoon, Sharice confirmed the forged power of attorney. I took back every point of access Marcus thought he still controlled. I went straight to the condo while Marcus and Simone were out, under the pretense of checking on a leaky bathroom pipe. The locksmith was already waiting when I pulled up. Curtis, a quiet man from Old Fourth Ward locksmiths, nodded as I handed him the written order and ID. No need for explanation. I pointed to the main entrance and the rear patio slider. Full replacement, I said. No duplicates. Inside, I moved quickly. I knew the layout better than anyone. Down to the drawers Simone kept her extra key in, and the kitchen hook Marcus had mounted for emergencies. I gathered every copy, every spare, and slid them into a Ziploc. By the time Curtis handed me the new gold-plated key labeled Owner Only, both entrances had been changed and tested. I paid in cash and asked for a stamped receipt, which I added to the growing folder in my tote bag. Nothing symbolic, just cold, traceable evidence of ownership. Then I drove to Fidelity and met Eric Dalton in his office. He'd already received Charissa's call and prepared the revocation paperwork. I signed the GAPOA Rev 102 right there under fluorescent lights, revoking Marcus's financial privileges in full. Eric made 2 copies, one for me, one for the trust file, and notarized both while I watched. On the way out, I passed a young woman arguing with her banker about a late fee. She sounded like I used to, apologetic, rattled, unsure of what she could demand. I looked at her for a half-second longer than I needed to, then kept walking. Back at the house, Marcus noticed the missing garage clicker before I even made it up the stairs. "Hey, you take the backup remote?" he asked from the hallway. I paused on the step. "You won't be needing access anymore." His brows pinched. "What does that mean?" "It means your authority has been revoked," I said, voice low. "All of it." For the first time since this began, he didn't respond with a defense. Just watched me walk past like he'd missed a deadline he didn't even know existed. That Saturday night, I didn't speak to anyone. No television. No background music humming to fill the silence. I sat in the spare bedroom, the one they had once claimed was perfect for you, Mom, just enough space, and stared at a framed photo from Stone Mountain. Marcus had been 7, all knees and elbows, reaching up to grab my hand as we climbed the slope. His eyes were wide with excitement, not fear. Back then, he trusted me with his whole being. Back then, I thought I was raising someone who'd protect legacy, not loot it. But grief has a way of leaving your memory soft around the edges, and somewhere along the path from widowhood to dependence, I'd let that softness become silence. I told myself they were just overwhelmed. That money made people short-sighted. That family, no matter how strained, eventually bends back toward love. The lies I told myself were quieter than theirs, but more dangerous. Now, with my accounts frozen, titles resecured, locks changed, and a fraud case open under Marcus's name, the air felt different. Not free, not yet, but stripped of illusion. The sadness had been replaced by something sharper, not bitterness, clarity. And clarity didn't come with a sigh, it came with a deadline. Sunday was coming fast. I had already told Simone I'd be happy to discuss the condo transition over brunch. That was the bait. They believed I was still soft, still considering next steps with their comfort in mind. Simone even suggested inviting her parents, just to make it feel more like a family thing. I agreed, smiling politely, watching her mentally decorate the guest house they thought would be theirs by Christmas. What they didn't know was that every folder, every document, every recording, yes, even the one from the breakfast nook conversation, was now organized and labeled. Charisse had reviewed my affidavit. The revocation forms were notarized. The Rolex listing had been captured with a timestamp. And the condo? Already transferred into a secure living trust under new terms Marcus would never see coming. But tonight wasn't for planning. It was for putting down the fantasy that I had failed as a mother. I hadn't failed. I had adapted, survived, endured, and now I was responding. I turned off the light, the photo still beside me, and let the dark fill the room like armor. On October 29th, the air had a weight to it, not from weather, but from the precision of what was about to unfold. I arrived at Trinity Community Hall 15 minutes early. Reverend Elijah had already unlocked the side entrance and helped me arrange the chairs around the conference table. It wasn't a lavish setting, just a long oak table, coffee urn, paper napkins, a tray of muffins I didn't bake. But that wasn't the point. The room didn't need polish. It needed structure. I laid out 2 red folders at the center of the table, one thinner than the other. The thick one had weight, both literal and legal, labeled clearly, fraud, misuse, and revocation. The slimmer one carried the bait, condo title transfer proposal. Nothing inside was binding, but it looked convincing enough to keep them seated. By 10:01, Marcus and Simone arrived, he in a blazer that still had the department store tag tucked under the cuff, she in her usual shade of casual expensive, lips glossed and eyes calculating. Simone's parents trailed in behind them, smiling too brightly, unsure of whether they were here to witness a gift or a grievance. I greeted them all evenly, gesturing to the table. Marcus pulled out the chair closest to me, glancing at the folder with open hunger. "So this is it?" he asked, already half smirking. "You're ready to move forward?" I folded my hands. "In a way." Simone leaned in, voice syrupy. "We're just so grateful you're doing this with intention. It's really going to help us get things in order before the new year." I nodded once. That's what this is about. Clarity. The room settled into a hum of small talk while coffee was poured. Simone's father flipped through the brochure I'd included as a decoy, an outdated contractor estimate I'd doctored to suggest renovation costs. At 10:11, when I was sure no one else was coming, I opened the thicker folder, lifted out the first page, and placed it in front of Marcus. "Before we go any further," I said, "there are a few things we need to address." He glanced down and froze. Simone's mug stopped halfway to her mouth. The page read, "Statement of Financial Irregularities, Gaines Family Accounts, compiled by C. Holloway Esquire." They didn't reach for the muffins again. The air shifted as soon as I laid down the first document. Marcus's mouth opened slightly, but no sound followed. Simone straightened in her chair, one manicured finger still resting on the handle of her untouched coffee mug. I gave them no time to recover. I began with the 6 months of bank statements, sliding them one by one across the table. I had highlighted the unauthorized transfers, circled the wire attempt in red ink, and attached the access logs with Marcus's IP address printed in bold. "These weren't accidents," I said. "They were calculated withdrawals from an account you didn't own." Simone looked to Marcus for direction, but he didn't meet her eyes. I could see the shift beginning, her realizing she'd followed a man who hadn't told her how much I already knew. Next came the Venmo receipts, transfers marked reimbursement from a joint account that only I funded. "If you had nothing to hide," I said, "why were these labeled like repayment for money you never gave?" Simone blinked fast, opened her mouth, closed it again. Then I placed the jewelry appraisal in front of them. "Recognize this?" I asked, tapping the printout from Jeffries of Atlanta. "That Rolex belonged to your father. It was never yours to sell?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "This is a misunderstanding." "No, Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "What you misunderstood was the difference between access and ownership." Then I reached for the final piece, the forged power of attorney. I didn't speak right away, just laid it down like a verdict, letting the silence thicken around the edges. Simone's father finally leaned in to read, his brow creasing. This says she authorized someone named Keisha Layton?" he muttered. "You didn't say anything about this." Because they hadn't told him. They thought he wouldn't need to know. He did now. I flipped to the back page, where the Fulton County Clerk's rejection letter was stapled. Fraudulent submission. Invalid notary. Immediate flag for legal review. Marcus looked pale. Simone stared down at her lap. I pushed the folder to the center of the table. "This isn't a discussion," I said. "This is documentation. And this is where your influence ends." Marcus reached for the folder with stiff fingers, rifling through the pages like he could somehow rearrange the facts. His voice finally returned, low and defensive. "This all feels harsh, Mom. Couldn't we have talked this through privately?" I didn't flinch. "You had access for 5 years and spoke nothing but convenience. Now you want privacy?" He turned to Simone, but she wasn't backing him. Her eyes were on the Rolex appraisal, lips parted in disbelief. Her loyalty had always been transactional, tied to whatever Marcus could control. Now she was calculating risk. Simone's mother cleared her throat. Maybe this has gotten blown out of proportion. I'm sure no one meant any real harm. That's when I opened the next file. Digital evidence summary. IP logs, screenshots, email confirmations, notarized letters from Charisse. Every transaction traced, every login sourced. No blanks, no gray areas. I slid it across the table. The bank flagged this as fraud, I said. So did my attorney. The county clerk rejected the forged POA. Nothing here is blown out of proportion. It's verified. And it's documented. Marcus sat back, rubbing his forehead. This is going to ruin us. No, I said. You did that when you tried to build your future on the theft of mine. I turned the final page. The last piece wasn't a document. It was a photograph. The one from Stone Mountain. I didn't explain it. I just let it sit on top of the evidence pile. That boy had been mine. That hand in the photo had held hope. Somewhere along the line, he had let it go. From the back of the room, Reverend Elijah rose from his chair. They hadn't even noticed him. He stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. Looks like the Lord's house ain't the only one she secured, he said, his voice calm and certain. When someone protects what's sacred, it's not revenge, it's stewardship. No one responded. Even Simone's father, who had looked smug an hour earlier, now appeared as if he wished he hadn't come at all. I stood, gathered the folder, and laid one more document on the table. A letter revoking Marcus's trustee status, signed and notarized, effective immediately. Then I walked out without waiting for permission, apology, or applause. Marcus didn't follow me out. Not right away. He stayed seated, shoulders hunched, while Simone wiped under her eyes with the edge of a linen napkin. Her tears weren't grief. They were the tears of someone watching a plan collapse. Reverend Elijah held the door as I left the conference room, his presence solid and wordless, the kind of quiet strength men like Marcus never knew how to measure. We didn't speak until we reached the sidewalk. Then he placed his hand gently on my shoulder. They mistook your silence for surrender, he said. But the Lord never told you to be quiet. He told you to be wise. I nodded, but I wasn't looking for affirmation. I had built this response one document at a time, not for validation, but for permanence. At 3:47 p.m., back at Charisse's office, I handed her the signed revocation of Marcus's trustee authority. She reviewed the signature, stamped it with her office seal, and logged it into the estate file. As of that moment, Marcus no longer had any legal claim over my assets, decisions, or affairs. The position he thought was permanent had been stripped, legally, cleanly, and without his consent. Then Charisse opened the deed transfer packet. "Ready to file this with the trust amendment?" she asked. I nodded once. She notarized the last page and slid it into the outgoing legal envelope. By Monday morning, the property title would reflect its new owner. Not me directly, but the irrevocable trust I'd named weeks earlier. The sole beneficiary, my grandson Jordan. Jordan didn't know yet. He didn't need to. He was still in school, too young to carry the weight of inheritance or betrayal. But he would never have to beg to stay in a home his family tried to take from his grandmother. They'd never use charm or guilt to corner him in a kitchen and call it love. As I left Charisse's office, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "We need to talk. I didn't mean for this to go so far. Please." I didn't respond. The law had spoken louder than his regret, and the next time Marcus tried to enter my world, he'd find every door locked, with his name nowhere on the key. Marcus didn't speak during the final moment that mattered. Not when I turned the deed transfer toward my name, not when I told them the condo was already secured in an irrevocable trust, and certainly not when I read the beneficiary clause aloud. His silence wasn't shock. It was calculation, the desperate math of a man realizing there were no more loopholes. Simone broke first. Her face crumpled, and she let out a sharp, muffled cry, covering it with a tissue she didn't bother to fully unfold. "You're giving it to Jordan?" she asked, voice rising through her embarrassment. "He's just a kid." I looked at her, unflinching. "He's a child who's never lied to me." That puts him ahead of most adults in this room. Simone's father muttered something to his daughter, something about lawyers and exposure, and then shot Marcus a look. "You didn't say she had this kind of power?" he whispered, too loud not to be heard. "She's my mother," Marcus said quietly. "She wasn't supposed to use it." That was the closest thing to a confession I would ever get. I didn't rub it in. I didn't raise my voice or drag them through more of their own mess. I simply handed Reverend Elijah a sealed envelope addressed to the Trust's Oversight Committee and walked him to the door. The envelope contained the final legal confirmation of transfer, no longer reversible, no longer subject to family manipulation. Before I left, I paused at the head of the table. "I offered you honesty. You chose entitlement. This trust is permanent. You're not entitled to a single inch of it." Marcus blinked hard, but said nothing. Simone stared down at her empty plate, as if brunch had ever really been the point. I walked out of Trinity Hall and didn't look back. Outside, the air felt sharp. Not cold, but precise. Like every lie they told had been carved away, and what was left could finally breathe. That trust will grow with Jordan, but more than that, it'll protect what's mine, from them, from anyone who confuses proximity with inheritance. Let them find new dreams to finance. My legacy is no longer for sale. That same afternoon, I returned to my condo alone. Not just legally, not just in paperwork, but in full possession of a space no one else had touched. Inside, nothing had been touched since I'd last been there. The air was dry, clean, still. I walked through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with what had always been mine: the books on the shelf, the folded quilt draped across the reading chair, my husband's military photo, framed in dark wood, still resting on the sideboard. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and reached for the small safe. The keypad blinked as I entered the code. When the lock clicked open, I didn't hesitate. I lifted the velvet box and opened the lid. The Rolex had been returned 2 days earlier, without fanfare. Charisse had sent a quiet cease and desist to the consignment office, citing ownership fraud and including the serial number. They hadn't even argued. The watch came back in a plain mailer, no note inside. But I hadn't looked at it until now. I ran my thumb gently across the face. Still ticking, still gold, still his. I placed it back into the safe, but not out of reach. Not this time. I closed the door, reset the code, and tucked the key into the pocket of my coat.